So next slide, please. Right, so this session is the electric vehicles, fun or affordable? We're going to find out in a few minutes. Can I start with the next slide, please? Housekeeping notes. So if you're not familiar with Zoom webinar, just to tell you, only our speakers and panelists have the ability to use their microphones. If you have questions to ask, and we do hope that you have, please click on the question and answer button on the left-hand side. Sorry, and there's a ribbon on the bottom, so just hover your mouse over that and you'll see a Q&A button, and just type your questions in there, please. You will notice also there is a place for chat, and that's actually for commentary, and if you've got any ideas you want to share, so please also put those in. We also have a poll about 15 minutes into this. I hope you're going to participate in that. And for friends and family who want to watch this afterwards, if you want to recommend it to anybody, then this will be uploaded to the Sustainable Living in the Heatons website, and there'll be a YouTube video of this content. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Sustainable Living in the Heatons has been in existence for about 10 years now, and there's a bit of frustration, or more than a bit, amongst members about what sustainability means now, and whether it's just become a bit of a slogan. So in the past 10 years, we've seen increasingly urgent messages from scientists and the UN about the trajectory we and the planet are on. And, you know, I accept that, I think we all accept the transition of sorts has begun. In the UK sense, we can witness the end of coal and the rapid rise in the deployment of renewable technology. But overall, the pace of change is not matching the jeopardy. Technological innovations are within our grasp, but they are not being matched by national or worldwide political leadership. That's a concern. But what do? We can either despair, next slide please, or we can change at this pace, the lack of pace, or we can do our best in our personal lives as businesses, as communities, and influence and make change happen faster. So this festival is about the personal in this. It's to help you answer the question, what more can I do? And it offers answers to what we can all do differently as consumers and as citizens. And I'd emphasize the citizens bit as well, because we've managed in the course of this to incorporate the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, in her first weekend, and we finish on Sunday with Nav Mishra, our MP, talking to our Youth Commission. So, next slide, please. So, who are our panel? I've introduced myself as the chair. We've got Paul Dunk, who works for Inchcape and is a Volkswagen specialist. He has background in other technologies in cars, including Tesla. So he'll be giving us an insider's view of the industry. We've Jason Smith from Transport for Greater Manchester, who's responsible for chargers and all things electric in relation to the Greater Manchester area. And Ian Barker, who's going to give us Sustainable Living in the Heatons perspective, particularly on batteries. So the event was, the question was, are electric vehicles affordable and fun? Let's see. Next slide, please, and can you start the video?
I'm Mel Godfrey. I'm going to tell you how I'm surprised to be driving around in this electric car here. In October last year, 2019, Mary and I, my wife, were looking to replace a big old Volkswagen Passat that was putting out about nearly 2 tons of carbon dioxide and was probably quite a bad polluter as well. And so we started a bit of an option in looking at what was in the market, but to be honest, never thought we'd be in a position where we'd end up driving an electric car. And two reasons for that. We expected the cost to be too high, and we weren't quite sure that the infrastructure was right. And what we found out was that we were wrong on both counts. Right, I want to talk to you about fuel costs next. One of the remarkable differences between running an electric car and the diesel that we used to run last year is the fuel costs. So the difference comes about because the charging rates for electricity, particularly overnight, using a company that provides complete renewable energy, is at only 5 pence per kilowatt. So let me show you on the screen. So the screen here shows you a average use per mile of 4.7 miles, per kilowatt. I can compare that with the diesel that I used to put into the old Volkswagen Passat we had prior to this, which actually had an average of about 9.5 miles per litre. And the difference in terms of the actual price in my pocket is enormous. So for 1,000 miles, I would be spending just short of £150 in order to fuel up the car. Using these special tariffs that are available through a number of the energy companies these days, I'm able to buy my fuel for about £12 for 1,000 miles. So it makes a remarkable difference. So the 5 pence per kilowatt is for home charging, or that's certainly one of the tariffs that's available to you. The charges are a bit more if you buy it off the public network, but still significantly cheaper than the diesel and the petrol alternatives. So for example, if I'm on the motorway, I need to charge, and this is typically what we've done on routes to London, where we need to charge about 60% into the journey. And that costs us about usually 25 or 30 pence a kilowatt. You compare that again in relation to diesel and petrol, we're paying maybe a third, maybe a half at the most compared to that alternative. So even when being charged at the highest rate that you will be charged for electricity for an electric vehicle, it's still extremely competitive. So the totality of this is as follows. So in a year, or done on a monthly basis, our old car was costing us about £200 a month. That's because there was road tax to pay for, the maintenance costs are higher, other things, and particularly the diesel. So in summary, we're paying just under £100 per month to run around in what turned out to be a brand new electric vehicle that we're not polluting with, and we are not creating any carbon footprint with. So that was a surprise, that we should be able to do so for such a relatively small sum of money. And I say that because there was no virtue in what we were doing. It was always going to be an economic decision. And the decision to have a look at electric cars was really more to knock off that as an option than an expectation that we'd end up in a position of actually running one as we have. So what's the car like? The car's great to drive as compared to a manual gearbox or even a automatic gearbox on a car with gears. It's incredibly smooth. It does have the welly when you need it in traffic. And I found it, I mean, I really surprised myself that I'm really not particularly concerned about cars and their makes, but this one's, you know, I really enjoy driving it. I like getting in it, and it's a joy to drive. And we also drive with the new innovations that are available in hybrid cars these days, but also available in this one, which is to be able to use regenerative braking, which means that once we switch this on, any surplus electricity when you're braking or going downhill goes back into the battery. But what it means in terms of how you drive is you effectively drive on one pedal, and it's something you very quickly become used to. And so much so that actually I can't imagine a better way of controlling a car now than being able to both accelerate and brake on the same pedal. And if you really do need to stop quickly, there's always a brake pedal you can use in an emergency. So in terms of innovation, I'm enjoying that. So. One of the things that people talk about a lot in relation to electric cars is range anxiety. In other words, a worry that you're going to run out of charge during your journey, or particularly if you're doing a long journey. I have to say it's not something that I share at all. There's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, I'm able to charge the car at home in our drive. That makes quite a lot of difference in relation to always being in a position where the car is topped up. However, if we're making a long journey, then there's the use of the technology with mobile phones and the public charging system that makes range anxiety, again, something which really doesn't exist for us. And the reason is this: so there's a thing called ZapMap on mobile phones, which gives the whole of the public charging network, every single charging point. I can find that on an app, and the app will also tell me about its status. This means that I can control the journey time. So typically, if we're going to London, I can't get to London on one single charge. This particular car doesn't allow that to happen, although the newer models would do that. But what it does mean is that I can plan to stop at a particular service station. I can look ahead and make sure that the pumps or the chargers are working, and just plan to stay for 40 minutes. That's time for a coffee and a sandwich. The charging's finished and we're off again. And I think once you're into the mindset that you plan the journey and you can maybe take a little bit longer at a service station, then actually it becomes so much easier to think about. So that sense in which, because you can put several hundred miles into the tank of a diesel or a petrol car, it goes away, and it'll certainly go away for the new generations of electric car, where the range is 300 and or so miles. I don't see that being a problem at all. Yeah, the other motivation to investigate electric cars was also about the transition that's clearly taking place at the moment in the car industry between the old petrol and diesel engines through to something new. And if we as consumers aren't making a difference there and showing the companies that we want to buy their products, it's just going to happen more slowly. And slowly and time is really a huge problem for everybody and the planet, because we need to slow this change that's going on right now down significantly, and it will take a long time to turn it around. So as a consumer, it felt right also to be investigating that, and if possible, becoming the user of an electric car rather than a petrol or a diesel car.
So that's one person's individual view of electric vehicles and their future. What we're going to do now is move to Paul Dunk. Paul's going to give us a perspective on the wider industry, why it's where it is now, and the changes that are taking place very rapidly, as Paul will explain. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Dunk, as Mel said. I work as business development manager in HCAF Volkswagen in stock. So yeah, the penalty is massive, and this goes for all vehicle producers. You'll see the term OEMs, and that refers to original equipment manufacturers. So that's all vehicle producers, and you'll see that throughout the presentation. Go to the next slide, please. So, let's go back one. Just going a bit further. There we go. Okay. If anybody's purchased a car in the last 6 months, 12 months, I guess, conversations in motor dealerships will be, especially when you're looking at things like road tax, will have been around the new legislation regarding real-world driving emissions. And these are being reassessed for every manufacturer. Fuel consumption figures claimed by manufacturers generally, because the way the CO2 is being measured is going up. So the cars are being reclassified, re-rated for their CO2. So a car that 2 years ago may have had a grams per kilometre of 100, all of a sudden you'll find that they've moved off a tax bracket and they're being reclassified at sort of 130, 140 grams per kilometre, which doesn't help trying to achieve this 99 grams target that we've got to hit. So the pressure is on to come up with more sustainable solutions across the entire industry. Since 2014, therefore, UK registration of EVs have grown almost exponentially, and now most manufacturers have at least one pure electric offering within their range, as the demand for cleaner transportation grows. If we move on to the next slide, you can see how this has manifested itself with registrations across the UK. So we wind the clock back to 2011, 2012, 2013, and the number of vehicle registrations is pretty small compared to the rest of the market. Something happens in 2014, which we'll move on to in just one second, and you see this rapid increase in plug-in grant eligible cars. So basically pure EVs, electric vehicles. 2014, 15, 16, 17 is where we are now, where 2019 with 275,000 electric or hybrid vehicles registered on UK roads. This is down pretty much to one company, and that's Tesla. So if we move on to the next slide, the first part of Tesla's grand plan to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, which is inherent to their culture, actually. If you speak to anybody who works for Tesla, ask them what their mission is, and they'll repeat those exact words to you. 2014 saw the Model S hit UK shores, although the car had been launched in 2012 in the US market. It was intended to be a high-priced, low-volume car with the revenue generated to be reinvested to further develop the model range, and that arrived, as I say, in 2014 in the UK, having had a car previously launched based on a Lotus, which was the first foray into proving that electric vehicles were fun and were actually enjoyable to drive, and could be used as a real-world vehicle. 2016 saw the Model X. You may have seen this car on various platforms, YouTube, with its falcon wing doors. Again, higher price than the Model S, up to sort of £150,000 with all the bells and whistles on it. But again, low volume and with the same purpose of generating revenue. If we flick to the next slide, we'll see a slight change of tack for Tesla's product strategy with the Model 3, which was launched with the intention of being a higher volume and lower price point vehicle, allowing the technology that Tesla developed over previous years to be much more accessible. Their ticket price, if you like, was to be $30,000, which is real world speaking, when we talk about import taxes and all that kind of stuff getting across from America, you're looking in the UK around about £35,000. And this really lit the blue touch paper for all of the other manufacturers to really think and invest in their own products. So Volkswagen, Nissan, Renault, Audi, Mercedes and Jaguar all hit the market very, very hard with pure EV offerings, taking on board the lessons learned and the pioneering work by Tesla in the preceding years. If we go to the next slide, we can see actually what the registrations just in Q1 of 2020, so before all of this COVID business kicked off, we can see what the new car registrations in the UK look like, with the first line there being the Tesla Model 3. Now, as with statistics, there's a story behind the numbers, and the big long blue line really is down to the registrations of these cars that were ordered back in 2017, finally hitting UK shores. So it's a little bit higher than it will be, but certainly it is the most popular EV on the market as we speak. We'll see more and more of these cars on the road as these orders come to the point of delivery. But if you look through that graph now, you can see just how many manufacturers are offering either a plug-in hybrid or a pure electric vehicle. And as we see, Jaguar I-Pace, Peugeot E208, Audi e-tron, Volkswagen e-Golf, so on and so forth. So that's really giving you an idea of the breadth of choice that you have now as a consumer for either a plug-in hybrid or a pure EV, which are all the blue lines there. If we move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so more cars, more chargers, right? Well, yes, is the short answer. ZapMap recently have said that there are now more electric vehicle charging points in the UK than there are petrol pumps or diesel pumps. But they're not always where you expect them to be, which is why ZapMap is such a key tool in EV ownership. The overall number of charging points available has increased to support the number of cars on the road, no two ways about that. But most importantly, there's been an increase in the various types of charger that are really driven by the location of that charger and also the type of vehicle that you wanted to charge up. So the ultra rapid chargers, which are 50 kilowatt chargers or more, which are on an e-Golf, for instance, will fully charge the battery somewhere between 30-40 minutes, as Mel said on his little video there. Right the way through to the lower capacity chargers that are intended to be used in long stay car parks, for instance, where you don't necessarily need such a rapid charge. I know Jason's going to touch on this with charging infrastructure for Greater Manchester a little later, so I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'll let him talk a little bit more about that. But in reality, most EV owners' charging habit is going to be very similar to that of their mobile phone. So what do we do with our phones? We plug them in when we go to bed, and when we come down next morning, then we've got a nice full charge, and that's exactly what happens with the majority of EV owners. Installation of a home charging facility wide into the mains, dedicated rather than trailing extension leads and things across the place. You can put what's referred to as a Type 2 charger in a home, charge the car up overnight, and every time you come down in the morning, you've effectively got a full tank. If we go on to the next slide, please. So while we're driving around in cars that are zero emissions, that's not to say that the whole process is a zero emissions process. Building a car is a CO2 heavy process, but certainly Volkswagen Group are looking at ways in which they can recoup marginal gains wherever possible. So from smart lighting in factory bathrooms, canteen areas that are only required when needed, right the way through to battery production. As the graphic you can see there says at the bottom, more than half of the CO2 emissions in building a car are attributable to the production of battery cells and cathodes. Well, by using green electricity, so sustainable electricity supply, whether that's solar panels, wind generated power at the factory, it enables CO2 to be reduced by up to 80% in the production of those cells. So the bods at Wolfsburg, the guys literally in white coats are thinking long and hard about where we can get these marginal gains. And it's not just about production either. If we go to the next slide, please. Volkswagen Group have recently charted the services of this beast. It's a ship. It doesn't look like it, but basically it's a floating car transporter. It's a ship called the Seam Confucius. It's the first overseas car freighter to use liquefied natural gas. And as you can see from the graphic there, it's going to reduce carbon dioxide by up to 25%. Now, we know shipping is a big polluter from a CO2 point of view. Reduces nitrogen oxides by up to 30%, subparticles by up to 60%, and sulfur oxides by up to 100%. So the thinking in terms of reducing CO2 really is sort of end to end. And with that in mind, if we can move to the next slide, please. One of the questions, and I know Ian's going to cover this off in just a short while, is about battery life. And the surprising element of this is that early adopters of EV technology, the likes of Tesla, Panasonic, etc., expected there to be a significant drop-off in battery performance. Now, when we say performance, it's not just about how quickly you get from 0 to 60, it's about the usable range, how quickly it can charge, how it holds the charge. And actually, now we're beginning to get a lot more data on this subject. The performance is far less, the performance drop-off is far less than expected. The knock-on effect of this, or one of the knock-on effects of this, is that confidence in the approved used market for electric vehicles is improving, and we're seeing an improvement that goes with that of residual values, and they continue to strengthen alongside their petrol and diesel internal combustion engine equivalents. So the market for used EVs is getting stronger and stronger, and you'll see this when you go onto the likes of Auto Trader to do your next used vehicle search. You put your parameters in and actually search for pure electric vehicles, and you'll see really strong offerings from most manufacturers that are now seeing that first cycle of electric vehicles from 2014-15 now coming back into the used car market. Manufacturers are working tirelessly with other industries, however, to come up with solutions for battery units that are no longer viable for vehicle propulsion. Options here include electricity storage cells, so solar panels on roofs generating electricity that's then stored in these battery cells in a domestic or commercial setting for electricity supply. But there are still some concerns over the actual disposal of batteries when they come to the end of their useful life and recycling of them. But this is a work in progress, so watch this space. And as I say, I think Ian's going to cover that off a little later. So that's where we are in terms of EVs. That's not just a Volkswagen timeline. That's really EVs as a general synopsis of where they come from and where we go in the future. And more and more manufacturers are coming on board. Volkswagen are developing a family of electric vehicles now to eventually replace the petrol and diesel equivalents that we've seen on our roads for so long. But yeah, happy to answer any questions that you might have more specifically. I appreciate that this is going to generate a huge amount of interest and therefore questions as a result, and it's impossible to sort of cover this off even in the sort of 10-15 minutes we've got here. So happy to answer any questions that anybody's got further down the line. Okay, so cost of ownership. Manufacturers always have a finance house, and they will always offer a number of ways to buy or lease or rent cars, as Mel's alluded to in the video there. More and more customers now are looking at usership. Ownership is not really high on the agenda. It's using a car for 2, 3, 4 years and then changing it for something else. In fact, our retail arm at Volkswagen in Stockport on new cars, over 90% of new vehicle purchases are funded in some way through the manufacturer's funding methods, whether that's personal contract purchase, contract hire, so on and so forth. And from a contract hire point of view, which is what I look after, it allows individuals to access the higher volume discounts that would be reserved for big corporate clients, and therefore the cost of ownership is much reduced, which brings them in line with their petrol or diesel equivalent. So the example here we've got is for a petrol engined Golf style, 1.5 petrol automatic transmission, coming in around about £326 per month, and that's based on 3 rentals in advance over a 3-year term with a 10,000 miles per year allowance. Compare that with the e-Golf that we saw in the video there. Similar kind of performance, albeit with a 1-speed automatic gearbox because it's an electric motor, coming in at £301.72 per month on a like-for-like basis. So that's the cost of usership, if you like, of the car. If we then look at things like running costs, so if we go to the next slide, please. Servicing costs are similar. Main dealer servicing for an EV will be very similar to petrol and diesel because the labour rates are a little bit higher, as 2 technicians need to work on the car at all times because of the nature of the car and the high capacity battery there. Should it choose to discharge itself on a technician, there needs to be somebody on standby there to help out. So there's health and safety obligations regarding the servicing of electric vehicles, which require a little bit higher labour rates. However, the cost of consumables is a lot less because there are fewer moving parts in an EV. There's no engine to speak of. The ongoing cost of lubricants, coolants, etc. is far less. And because of regenerative braking, which Mel spoke about in the video, the tyres and braking systems, the wear and tear on them is a lot less with the correct driving style. So you will see tyres and brakes last an awful lot longer than you would on a petrol or diesel equivalent. The regenerative braking is something that needs to be experienced really to be believed. So as we move into the next part of the presentation, it'll be interesting to get people's thoughts on that and whether they've experienced it for themselves. But as I say, any questions relating to this, happy to answer at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll take those in a second, please, Paul. Can I just do the poll next?
You should be seeing it now up on screen, and the question is, are you likely to investigate ownership or leasing of an electric car in the next few years? Give you a couple of seconds I'll end the poll.
Yeah, so if you click on yes or no, please, and then we'll bring up the answer in a second. So I'll give you 10 more seconds. So that's 7, 8, 9, 10. And Suze, can you bring up the result?
I didn't know he was coming on.
Oh, we had it briefly there. Seems quite a few people will. Could you bring it back again, Suze? There we go. Right. And can we have the next question, because it relates entirely to how easy this is. That's question 1 again, Suze. Can we come back to question 2? So again, if I can give you 10 more seconds. Right, if we could see the answer to that one now, please, Suze. Right, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that to be quite as decisive as that. So, right, we'll come back to that in a minute. So right, in terms of the question, maybe we should start with the one for Paul. For Paul, are OEMs having to reduce prices, subsidise EV sales in order to push sales hard, and so come under the emissions target and avoid that big fine? Paul, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
There we go. Sorry about that. I think there is an element of that. I think part and parcel of certainly Volkswagen's strategy in the coming 2 or 3 years is to phase in this family of electric vehicles, and in order for people to take that on board, I think it's very much an experiential thing. I think once people get behind the wheel of these cars and realise that they're not strange to drive, they actually feel really, really good in relation to a petrol or a diesel, because they're easier. They're much easier, as you say. You can drive them on one pedal. You haven't got the effort of gear changes, etc. So I think manufacturers are wanting to get people behind the wheel of these things, and as a result, need to incentivise from a financial point of view to get these cars on the drive, which then helps massively to hit these emissions targets that are pretty stringent. At the end of the day, you know, vehicle manufacturers are going to be stopped from producing petrol and diesel cars at some point. So what do we look at? Do we look at hydrogen power going forward? Do we look at electric? Well, electric seems to be the most sensible route and the most logical route for us to go down, I think, especially as battery technology improves and ranges improve.
Right, thank you, Paul. Okay, next question is from Anthea Cree. Anthea asks, what range would you need to cover an 80-mile round-trip commute to account for reduced range on the motorway and possible battery reduction over time? Perhaps I should answer this one in relation certainly to the e-Golf anyway, which is actually one of the cars that has a lower range as compared to the generation that's just about to come out, not just from Volkswagen, but from several of the car manufacturers. And I'll answer that in relation to the winter as well, because in the summer that's not a problem, but the range does go down in the winter. Having said that, with a full battery, I could still expect to do 120 miles, but 20 of that has to be in the battery at all times. So the reality is it's got a range of a minimum of 100 miles, even in the winter time. The range doesn't reduce on the motorway as it happens, because you're not stopping and starting. Actually, the range increases on the motorway. And the battery reduction over time, Paul's just talked about, actually the concern about batteries being problematic in relating to maintenance over a period doesn't appear to be becoming the case. In fact, in a minute, we'll be hearing a little bit more via Ian Barker about batteries. So I've a number of other questions, but I'm going to move on for the time being. We'll questions again towards the end. So could I have the Next presentation up, please, Jason.
Hi everybody, my name is Jason Smith. I work for Transport for Greater Manchester, and I'm going to cover today what's happening in Manchester at the moment. Obviously, Paul's referred to the national picture. Mel has covered kind of experiences, and I just wanted to try and kind of localise everything that's going on in Greater Manchester and try and summarise that as best I can. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. So obviously main focus at the moment is all around kind of climate and things as Paul alluded to before. The main thing that's happening in Manchester is with regards to air pollution. There's obviously some pretty damning stats there, particularly a contribution to about 1,200 deaths a year based on the studies that have taken place very recently. And you can see that transport really does have a huge contribution to what we would call kind of nitrous oxide issues. And they're the things that the government have asked all 10 of Greater Manchester local authorities to address, and TFGM are trying to support that as part of a wider mechanism, if you like, within all 10 authorities, like we try to do with everything really. If you move on to the next slide, please. So you'll see that some modelling work was done before the proposals for the clean air zone. All of those red stretches of road are areas within the Greater Manchester boroughs that would reach illegal levels of NO2. So the decision has been taken that if we were to introduce a clean air zone into Greater Manchester, it's not just going to be Manchester city centre like it has been with other cities that have proposed this, Leeds, Birmingham, London, obviously. We are intending to look at all 10 of those districts, which is an area of about 500 square miles, so it's absolutely huge. In the original modelling, only 8 of the 10 were above illegal limits, but the decision, as I say, was taken to ensure that all of those people work together. You'll also notice that the blue areas are what we would call the strategic road network, motorways and major A roads, and they don't fall under the jurisdiction of the council. They are controlled by Highways England, and they will be putting in their own measures. You might have seen something recently with regards to a reduction in speed limit. I think the M602 is going to be one of those roads that's going to be tested at 60 mile an hour instead of 70 mile an hour. And the whole point of that is to try and encourage a reduction in emissions in city motorways. Next slide, please. So very quickly, just to show you, so Manchester is intending to do a clean air zone. It doesn't affect individuals, so I have to make that very clear. So it won't be for private cars, but it will affect, as listed there, buses, coaches, taxis particularly, private hires, vans will be introduced later on, and minibuses and HGVs. So all of those in those stretches of road that were identified before, apart from the motorways, they will be required to pay a daily penalty charge. As the slide says, you can go into cleanairgm.com to get more information on this, and there's actually going to be a public consultation taking place for 8 weeks from the 8th of October. So I'm sure your views would be welcome there. But the key connection to all of that is obviously there will be a huge investment in electric vehicle charging and other EV related activity, which is what I'm going to cover as part of the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. So in Manchester, there's about 410 public charging devices across the 10 districts. That was taken from ZapMap, so that does include every single one, as far as we're aware, that is publicly accessible. 240 of them are on what we call the BEV network, which was previously the GMEV network and has been taken over by a new company recently. We've swapped out all of those charging points and refreshed them all with brand new ones. And as stated there, there's about 240 of them out of the 410 that fall under TFGM's jurisdiction. The majority of them are what we would regard as fast chargers. So those chargers are usually found in destinations where it could take anything from 4 to 8 hours to charge a car from empty to full. But you will find them kind of at the Trafford Centre, you'll find them at leisure centres, and you would find them in kind of park and ride car parks. We are seeing a lift in rapid charge investment though, and we are starting to install 25 new rapid chargers that will be in sometimes between now and kind of February. So there's 3 gone in the ground already. There's 1 just gone in at Massey Street in Cheadle, which is the nearest one. But again, as Paul said, and Mel, ZapMap is the holy grail for this stuff, and I would implore you to just go and have a look. Get familiar with the charging infrastructure that is around you. Next slide, please. So somebody has already asked a question about this, and I think it's a very pertinent question with regards to what if you don't have a driveway. Definitely don't do this. This is becoming a serious issue for highways across the UK. Particularly for people who have been asked to take these vehicles as part of maybe a work package or something like that, and they've said, yeah, that's not a problem, I can take that, and then when they've actually got it home, have thought about using extension leads or dragging things across the footway. Very, very difficult to do that, and you could find yourself in some serious bother if somebody was to hurt themselves on that. As I said before, investment in the network, a lot of supermarkets, workplaces, park and ride car parks are all starting to take on the challenge, and there will be some consideration for safer on-street chargers. So you may have seen some that are connected to lampposts, for example, as we start to get more into induction chargers. So obviously we've started to see those with phones. There are some trials going on in the UK at the moment with regards to vehicles and inductive charging. And I think it will be down to whether, obviously going back to kind of Paul's presentation with regards to what the OEM's doing and whether the two can kind of marry up and how quickly that can happen. The difficulty is highlighted as well in this picture, that the lamppost, if you can see from there was a big piece of work done in Manchester a few years ago to move all the lampposts to the back of the curb to try and keep the footway width as good as possible and not have obstructions. And we get constantly asked about lamppost chargers, and that is one of the difficulties there in installing those. So yeah, next slide, please. Somebody touched on hydrogen before as well, so we just wanted to include a little bit about buses and other vehicles effectively. So obviously TFGM are responsible for a level of buses. The 3 buses that you see in Manchester, for example, are all electric, and we have been given more funding to do that piece of work and expand those buses. And we've also been working with the providers. There was a bus consultation though about deprivatising the bus regulations in Greater Manchester very recently, and that has hampered some of those EV investments because those companies are not too sure what the future looks like for them. But as soon as that is resolved, then we'll obviously take that into account. Manchester City Council have very recently bought 30 electric bin trucks. So if you are part of Manchester City Council, then you'll see them moving around very soon. And just to answer the hydrogen question really, and just cover that, finding more and more that it's quite energy intensive to make hydrogen itself. The necessity for the infrastructure and the footprint that is created with regards to hydrogen infrastructure is massive. So there's a lot of understanding within the industry that a lot of bigger vehicles will start to move towards hydrogen, away from more from the personal car, and we believe that batteries will stay for kind of personal vehicles, and hydrogen will move into the bigger, heavier vehicles. Next slide, please. Just to touch on TFGM, I am the dedicated independent resource within Transport for Greater Manchester, so it's my role to speak to businesses and individuals and set up events and have engagement activities around electric vehicles to try and encourage uptake, and we will be continuing to do that, working with people like Paul, connecting with local dealers and trying to get businesses and the public trying to work together with those dealers and taking opportunities of test drives and things like that. And try before you buy schemes, again, a very similar opportunity for individuals, and we're working on a few schemes to try and introduce electric vehicles to businesses, taxi drivers and individuals. Next slide, please. And then wider support for electric vehicles are things that you might see in the future. There's an eHubs project taking place very soon with an electric car club and an electric cargo bike set up, so you'll be able to book either of those by the hour. And again, we're going to use those as opportunities to try to encourage people to shift away from cars and particularly try and have a look at a car club ownership model or potentially replacing your car completely with a cargo bike to help you do your shopping. There are some proposals for e-scooters, so I'm sure you will have heard over the kind of COVID lockdown. That was something that the government were keen to trial, given a wider foot space in social distancing. We're expecting some of those trials to take place in potentially Salford and potentially Rochdale, and if they are successful, then naturally they would be rolled out into other areas. But overall, we need an acceptance right across the board that there needs to be a reduction in car use throughout, and that is one of the most difficult challenges that TFGM face in the future. But trying to create these park and rides for electric vehicles, things like that, to try to support people making more sustainable choices is certainly part of our strategy moving forward. I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Right, I'd like to move straight on, please, to Ian, who's going to give us the conundrums about batteries, please, Ian.
Yep. Next slide, please. So, in helping with this session, it struck me that while there's no exhaust greenhouse gases or exhaust pollution, from each car there will be a battery to get rid of at the end of its life, hopefully many years in the future. But last year's car sales in the UK were 2.3 million. So at some point, maybe 10, 15 years in the future, after the government has brought in its no more diesel and petrol car rule, there could be something like 1 million tonnes of dead batteries to dispose of every year. These batteries at the moment in the small quantities, and the battery components, materials, are imported, and at the end of life, batteries and battery parts are exported for disposal in various places, and it's not always very clear just how well they are disposed of. Next slide, please. But there is some possible waste and pollution. So you can see that as a picture here. Oh, just to mention, I'll acknowledge Alberto Minghella of HSSMI for this. So thank you, Alberto. So it's showing large quantities of materials coming into the country, us putting batteries together, building cars, driving them around, as Mel's been doing around the streets of the Heatons recently, enjoying that, and then at some point all the materials getting shipped abroad. Next slide, please. So I wasn't alone in my concern, obviously. I realised that the government is already investing £270 million in what they call the Faraday Battery Challenge, a challenge to industry to do a couple of things. Part of it is to bring the a circular economy into the UK, such that nearly the whole of the battery can be recycled and the elements used from it in new batteries. It's recognised that that might not be totally profitable and that some regulation might be needed to help with that. Next slide, please. So the picture you saw a minute ago is the one on the left now. The the aim is to get this picture on the right with much less import and much less export of materials, and that recycling through materials processors. And you'll notice down in Cornwall, and maybe you saw, if anybody saw Countryfile a couple of weeks ago, Cornish people are now looking back down the old tin mines because they have been rich in lithium. So better recycling and lower costs for the UK. Next slide, please. So there's a consortium called the Valuable Consortium, Valuable Project, which are aiming to do the things that I've just spoken about, but also looking at battery design. One of the aspects of electric cars is if they are plugged into the mains overnight, it's possible for electricity, with your consent of course, to go both ways. And particularly perhaps during the daytime at half time in the FA Cup final, where the grid might like to suck a bit of electricity out of your car. So designing batteries that will allow that more easily and without damage to them is something that's being looked at. Also, there are second life applications that batteries are being used for now, after perhaps whatever 8 or 10 years, when they're down below 70% capacity. They're perhaps not good enough for driving your car properly, but they are still useful in a power wall where electricity can be used to boost your home heating or for other uses. And they're also looking at designing the battery so that it can not only be manufactured easily, but be dismantled easily, hence to improve recyclability. So the problems aren't solved yet, but there is a lot of engineering effort going into it. And the people I've spoken to in the teams are confident of achieving their aims. So next slide, please. So second point, having felt a bit better about that aspect, I wondered about when should I change to an EV? And I think if I bought a new car, it would be an EV. But when? I'm perhaps unusual. I do very few miles. I do a lot of walking and cycling and public transport, or at least did till COVID. And the mileage I've been doing over recent years has been the figures in that table there. 2,500 was a high point, 1,000 miles, and this year in the first 6 months I've done about 100 miles, so 200 miles a year. So as Paul said earlier, at the moment, or over the last few years, there's a lot of energy used in creating the car, creating a new car in the first place. Over 8 tons of CO2, quite a lot of it in the battery. But admittedly, as Paul said, if as the grid becomes greener and uses renewables, that should drop tremendously. But the sort of payback years for my car are, you can see in the table again. It doesn't say I ought to rush into doing this. So consider your own case, look after your car and keep it a long time. Next slide, please. Don't bother reading all this, but there will be references if you want to read more about batteries. Just look at the slheatons.org website. The only thing I will mention here is most of us have still got diesel and petrol cars. And one of our people, Hilary Hughes, has written a nice article which is on the website about getting the most out of that, driving that in the most economical way. Next slide, please. So we've had 3 sessions on travel over the 2 weekends. Do look back at the 2 previous ones, which we're getting about on bicycles and electric bikes and walking and talking about public transport and how to use less energy in other modes of travel. And next slide, please. And the things that we've spoken about in those sessions are very much in line with another challenge that the government has just set us all. I don't know quite who they throw these challenges at always, but they've set everybody the challenge of decarbonising transport through the sorts of activities that you can see there, including the bottom line that we've just been talking about, particularly today. So a bit of a rush through that, but hope you've got the messages. And last slide, please. So there you are. Enjoy your travel by whatever means. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Ian. So I'm going to take a few questions now and aim to finish in about 6 or 7 minutes, if you can indulge me, the audience. So first question, actually we've got a number of questions about leasing here, so I'm going to do a bit of compositing here. So they are about, is leasing now becoming the default? What happens to leases after 3 years? And will this drive, is this use of leasing, is this likely to drive a fall in unit production costs? Is that envisaged as part of the, certainly for Volkswagen anyway, their rollout of their new ID range? So perhaps you could start with Paul on this one, please. You'll need to unmute, Paul.
It's interesting that the first car in this new family, the ID3, has only been offered to customers as a lease, with a leasing package, because it does a couple of things. First of all, it spreads the cost of ownership, which we've alluded to with the other examples. It upholds the residual values of those cars. It makes it much more predictable for finance companies and manufacturers to value the car at the end of the agreement. So if your agreement is 3 years at 10,000 miles a year, they know they're getting a car back in 3 years' time with 30,000 miles on it. It makes predicting residual values much more accurate and able then to support that through the approved used car program. So it'll be interesting to see, as this the ID3 goes to market, then followed by the ID4 in 3 and 4 years' time, what the used car market looks like. I think you'll see these residual values being supported very well through the manufacturer programs. It also generates extra revenue as well, because you know the brand gets almost a second bite of the cherry. They get the ability to sell that car again and again and again and again, and therefore bring new customers into the brand. And that goes for every brand, you know, whether that's Jaguar I-Pace, whether that's Mercedes with their products. It's across the board really, and more manufacturers are tapping into it.
Which is one of the things is related to the pricing of leasing as well. It's a question about new petrol and diesel cars typically depreciate at about 30% in the first year. Does the degradation of battery life for EVs result in a greater potential resale problem for EV buyers?
I don't think so, no. I mean, all bits of mechanical engineering have drop off in terms of performance. You know, we've seen that with anybody who's got a 10-year-old car and the way that it drives in relation to when it was new. But I don't think that. I think the degradation of the performance of battery cells is a lot less than manufacturers thought it would be when they've originally launched the product. I think they'll be better for longer than equivalent petrol or diesel in reality.
Okay, right. And there's another question in relation to car clubs. So this needs to be the last one, I think. Okay. So the use of car clubs by either local authorities or the big leasing companies like Enterprise, why don't we see more of that in and around the Heatons, in and around Stockport? Perhaps you can help us on that, Jason.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's the same as everything. It comes down to money at the end of the day. The vehicles, as we've already discussed, are relatively expensive. So obviously Enterprise have to take a hit on that. They also have to install infrastructure that could potentially be on street as well. So that just adds a little bit of complication to the mix. And I suppose the major issue is kind of putting the things back on charge, which can be a worry for enterprise, particularly from a user point of view. If the next person comes to use it and it's not fully charged, I don't think they've quite had the confidence in the range previously when we've been at 100 to 150. As we start to get to these kind of 300, 350s, where it's not always essential for that to go immediately on charge, and can be picked up by somebody else, or even if they took it, it might still have 200 miles left on it. That's a much safer kind of net for people like enterprise. So as I said in my response, eHubs is a trial. We're looking forward to rolling that out into Didsbury and Chorlton. They were the areas selected, and then we will work with the other authorities wherever we can to introduce more e-car clubs across Greater Manchester.
All right, thanks for that. So one last question then, which is from June Robson. Does rapid charging reduce the life of the battery? Perhaps Paul, you can answer that.
But you wouldn't charge a car on a rapid charger all the time, unless you didn't have access to home charging, if you didn't have access to destination charging, or these lower capacity chargers. If you were just using rapid chargers around the motorway network, for instance, Tesla have a supercharge network around the place where their capacity, the charging capacity, is absolutely enormous. In fact, superchargers require their own electricity substation before they can install them. But charging habits aren't like that. The data that we're getting back from EV use is that the majority of customers are going to be using a much softer approach to charging their cars, and that is generally lower capacity, 7 kilowatts to 22 kilowatts as a maximum. It's like anything. The battery will degrade the quicker you use the charge, and the quicker you shove the charge back into it. So yes, is the answer, but that in reality isn't going to be the way people are going to be using these things.
All right, thank you. Right, can we? I'm going to wrap up now. So can I ask Suze to bring us up the last couple of slides? So what we hope you'll take away from this is that there is a transition taking place. And in this particular case, we've seen the one taking place in the motor manufacturers. But the thing that the personal thing we'd like you to take away is that you can help drive the transition that's taking place by what you do as a consumer. And I'm not necessarily advocating buying a car. That, it'd be nice to use more and more public transport. And that process is taking place through Greater Manchester at the moment as well. But also through your voice as a citizen, and that's a crucial one. We do hope you remember that too. We've shared some ideas. Hope you might follow some of them up, and you can make a difference, however small, in the future. And the other thought is that if you can do at least some of the transiting with others around you, then please do talk to others, share ideas, join in, get involved. It's always better to do these with others. Okay, thank you everybody. Tomorrow we have 3 more events on, starting with the business discussion, then doing some more on food and retail, green retail, and finishing with another session on the how to green your property. I hope you can join us. Thank you very much and good night.